1. Around 2 years ago, I used to work for this grocery store right around the corner from where I lived. I loved working there. I constantly had something to do, and when the store wasn't busy, I would talk with my co-workers and just enjoy the night. My main position was in the bakery and hot food area, but since we were only a small one, only one worker would be in at a time. A regular night would involve me slicing meat, serving food, and putting baked goods into the oven. After about 6 months of working there, I found out that I was moving town. I felt terrible and gave my manager my 2 weeks' notice. I felt terrible because this was out of the blue and they had to train someone new, so I offered to work without pay for the 2 weeks so they wouldn't lose money. My manager said no, it was fine, but he greatly appreciated it. Out of nowhere, I developed a severe pain in my mouth and discovered that my wisdom teeth were coming in and were causing some weird damage to my jaw. This resulted in me needing emergency surgery on the weekend after my 2 weeks' notice was up. The day after my surgery, my manager texts me. "We need you today. The scheduled worker called in sick and no one wants to cover his shift." Actually, AM, I just had surgery last night for my wisdom teeth right now and have taken a bunch of painkillers to soothe the pain. Also, my 2 weeks' notice is up, so technically I don't work for you anymore. Do I sound like I give a fuck? We need you, and if you don't come in now, I will see to it that you don't get hired anywhere else. So how does working sound like now? I was shocked. Before today, my manager had been the best boss to work for, so I was utterly surprised. Alright, I'll be in soon, I guess. You better be or else. About 5 minutes later, I get dropped off at the work. Normally, I'd walk there, but I had taken so many painkillers that I could barely remember how to get there. What took you so long? I've had to cover for you in the bakery for the past half hour. His last text was only sent 5 minutes before that. I quickly apologized, walked into the bakery, and started doing my work. Normally, I'm a good person who wouldn't start trouble, but because of how high I was ready to start making AM's life a living hell. Every time he asked for someone to help him out with a task, I would volunteer to help. Each time I would make myself fall off the ladder or cause food to come crashing down on me. He kept telling me it was all right, but as the night went on, I could tell his blood was starting to boil, so I continued. As the end of my night neared, my job was to clean the meat slicer, and I had a plan. I began to clean the meat slicer, but I accidentally turned it on. By this time I had no problems controlling my body, so I came as close as I could to cutting myself without actually doing it. AM walked in to see me do this and immediately screamed at me and told me how I could have killed myself. I just responded with a confused look on my face and said, "Oh, whoops, huh?" He just sat there looking at me and pulled me into his office, where he began screaming at me for all the stupid things I had done that night. The falling off the ladder, the dropping food on me, and now the meat slicer. Instead of getting upset because it was technically his fault, I just sat there with a blank look on my face, pulled out my phone, and showed him the messages he sent me. He went silent. I stood up and told him, "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," and walked out. The grocery store ended up firing AM for mistreating the employees, and he also got sued for sexual harassment by one of the other employees. The store also gave me a hefty paycheck because they decided to settle out of court instead of fighting a lawsuit that they would inevitably lose. 2. Many, many years ago, I worked as a barista in what was essentially Canada's version of a certain Seattle-based coffee chain. To my knowledge, it was the first time we were marketing our iced coffee. I think it was an off-menu item that could be ordered prior to that, because we had all the materials needed to make it. The procedure at the time went something like this. Grab a cold drink cup, heat it with ice, add sweetener syrup, as sugar doesn't mix or even dissolve as quickly or as easily, as per customer request, and then fill it with hot coffee from one of the carafes. Leave it a bit of room in case the customer wishes to add cream or milk, put the lid on, and give it to the customer. On occasion we had customers who requested light ice or even no ice, but when I explained to them how it was made, they understood and allowed for the normal amount of ice with no complaint. Well, all except one. Clueless customer, CC, a nondescript, middle-aged woman. "I'll get a large iced coffee, no ice." "I'm sorry, we make our iced coffee by pouring our hot coffee over ice. I will need to put some ice in there, or else it will be hot coffee." "Well then, just make it light ice." She says this while rolling her eyes. I process payment and start making the drink. Instead of adding a heaping cup full of ice, I keep it just below the brim. No, less than that. I shake out about a third of the ice from the cup. Much less. Like no more than 3 ice cubes. At this point, my brain flips that switch from life is good to what did I do to deserve this? Note that I'm not the most socially capable person, and although I've improved through ongoing active effort over the years, being at any customer service job at the time was a special kind of hell. One I enjoyed as long as I enjoyed the job, but in which I was about 3 steps away from a panic attack. I describe it as a tension between happiness and an ever-present fear that I was going to shatter at any moment. This was one of those instances that, looking back, I was acquiring the ability to avoid a breakdown by deciding to not give a fuck. I try to explain this to her again. It's the ice that makes it iced. We pour hot coffee over ice which cools it down, but we need a certain amount of ice in the cup to do that. I don't want ice in my coffee. I just want iced coffee. If you have to put ice in it, make sure it's very little. All right. Malicious compliance initiated. I placed 3 ice cubes. The ice machine we had made small ice cubes, less than half the size of those you'd make with your standard ice cube trays in your freezer, and hold up the cup so CC can see and possibly change her mind. She nods her approval. I turn to the carafe that held our signature blend. If the customer doesn't specify which coffee they want, it's our default. The cold cup, which is not meant to hold hot beverages, starts to deform from the temperature of the coffee, and my hand starts to burn. I put a sleeve on it, so that CC doesn't hurt her hand, and place it on the counter. The cup continues to deform very slowly. CC grabs it, looks at it with dismay. I can see the cogs in her head trying to turn, to comprehend why the coffee feels hot. There's something wrong with the cup. She says this as she points to how the base is bending inwards. Also, I asked for iced coffee, but this coffee is hot. You asked for iced coffee made with only 3 ice cubes. No further explanation. I'm not about to give a physics lesson at the counter of a coffee shop. I can pour it in a hot beverage cup if you'd like, or I can remake it. I left the with more ice part unspoken. To this day, I'm not sure whether the change I saw in her face meant that those cogs had finally managed to turn, but she simply grabbed the drink and walked over to the condiment counter. She proceeds to pour half the cup's worth of coffee into the garbage can. Seriously, guys, don't pour liquid into the garbage can at these places. That's what the grate is for. She pours the full contents of our 2% milk carafe into the cup, mixes it with a straw and takes a sip. She twisted her face in disgust, throws the whole drink into the garbage can, and hurriedly leaves the cafe. I immediately restocked the condiment stand and changed the garbage by pulling it quickly into the side room, so I didn't spill discarded coffee and garbage juices on the floor in front of our other customers. 3. Several years ago, I worked as a local delivery driver for a steel processing plant. We would take stock units of plate and structural steel and process them into parts our customers could use. Some processes, such as painting, would go to a third-party vendor and then come back to us for shipment to the customer. I worked on a set routine: deliver to the paint shop in the morning and bring back the orders painted the day before. While that trailer was being unloaded, I would hook another trailer and deliver finished orders to a customer about 70 miles away from the shop. This delivery had a hard appointment time of 2 p.m., and I could not miss it. When I returned after making the delivery, I would finish the day with short deliveries or pickups as needed and then go home. It was an easy, stress-free job, as long as I stuck to the routine and made my appointments on time. Communication between departments was poor, though, and it disrupted the entire process. For example, the scheduling department might think a certain production run had been finished and was gone for outside processing, when in reality, the production department hadn't even started the order yet. I spent a lot of afternoons driving around in an empty truck chasing phantom orders that I knew I had never delivered because some office drone wanted me to check and make sure, or running hot orders out to vendors that were overlooked during my morning trip. Enter my main antagonist, one of the first shift production supervisors. I was constantly butting heads with him because he forever tried to hold up my truck for last-second add-ons. This wouldn't have been a big deal, except they almost always interfered with my 2 p.m. delivery, the one I had to be on time for. I kept explaining that I could do his errands in the mornings or afternoons, but he couldn't mess with the middle of the day. He was arrogant and condescending with everyone, but he took a special dislike toward me because I wasn't in his chain of command and wouldn't bend over backwards to accommodate his wants. It didn't help that my direct superior was a milquetoast little man that avoided conflict at any cost. I ended up taking a lot of heat from this production supervisor, even though he couldn't really punish me for meeting my other work obligations. Things finally came to a head when the supervisor came up to shipping with a large order that needed to go to paint. I was about to leave for my 2 p.m. customer and told him so, but I had room left on the truck. If he wanted to load his parts on, I would deliver them on my way back from the primary delivery. This wasn't good enough for him. These parts were behind schedule and had to get painted immediately. If I delivered them in the afternoon, they wouldn't get painted until the following day, which would put him further behind. To top it off, this order required a special marine-grade paint that had been mistakenly delivered to our company location instead of the paint shop, and it all needed to go ASAP. We began our usual back and forth. I had a delivery appointment. I could do what he wanted, but I couldn't do it on his schedule. After a heated conversation where he devolved into rudeness and name-calling of a nature unbecoming of his position, he said,
"Fine, I'll take it myself in the other truck."
In addition to the tractor-trailer that I drove, we had a smaller delivery truck on hand for occasional use. He decided to drive it on the down low, loading up and heading out without telling our shipping department. This would have been a grand idea, but driving either truck requires a commercial driver's license, which this supervisor did not have. I pointed this out to him, to which he replied that he was only going up the road and everything would be fine. I pointed out that he didn't have a hazardous materials endorsement to transport the paint. Again, he was just going up the road, and I needed to shut the hell up, write him out the directions to the paint shop, and get out of the way since I was effing useless anyway. So did just that, and wrote him out a perfect set of turn-by-turn directions. How is that malicious compliance? Well, this paint shop was about 30 miles up the road, but I knew, and he didn't, that about 15 miles up the road was a DOT way station that always had at least 2 state troopers inside, and at least one of them was a commercial enforcement officer. The truck this supervisor wanted to drive wasn't equipped with an easy pass transponder that would allow him to bypass the scale. And I knew, given his already demonstrated ignorance, he wouldn't know that he was required to pull in. I figured he would blow right past and one of those state troopers would put down his coffee long enough to chase him down and find out why. To my great delight, that is exactly what happened. The troopers saw him drive past and pulled him over. Then they escorted him back to the way station for a thorough inspection. For those unfamiliar, the transportation industry is highly regulated. Some might say it's over-regulated, but anyone that makes it a career knows it's best to follow the laws or face some serious consequences. The supervisor didn't know any of this, and it was like a lamb to the slaughter. The DOT inspector ripped him to pieces. Among the biggest infractions he was cited for: no CDL, $2,500 fine, up to $10,000 to the company, misdemeanor charges, 90 days suspended driver's license. No hazmat endorsement, no documenting paperwork for the hazmat. No placards identifying the vehicle as carrying hazardous material. $50,000 fine to the company, more if it results in illness, injury, or death to another person. As a bonus, when the trooper escorted him back to the way station, the scale master saw him talking on his cell phone. This dude was making a panic call to the company manager. Using a handheld device is a big no-no. That's another $2,500, $10,000 to $11,000 to the company. The truck was put out of service at the way station until it had the proper bill of lading, hazmat paperwork, and a driver with a valid license. The supervisor wasn't allowed to leave until someone came to get him. Needless to say, he lost his job immediately. I suspected that would happen, so I hung around the shipping office after my afternoon delivery. I got to witness his walk of shame as he was escorted out of the building. I was never officially told just how much his fines were, but an educated guess puts it at thousands to him personally, and potentially close to $100,000 to the company. I do know the company tried to sue him in civil court to recoup their losses, although I don't know the outcome. I left to take another job shortly after. I figured that even though I wasn't the one at fault, my role in the fiasco wouldn't be looked upon in kind fashion. The best part, though, was that after months of watching him swagger around wearing a big, hubris cowboy hat, I was the one that got to swat it off his head. Just a few clarifications. For anyone thinking I had a greater responsibility to stop this clown, I left the building before he did. For all I knew, he had listened to my advice. I didn't think he would, but I didn't know that for sure until after the fact. The route I gave him was the only reasonable way to go. MapQuest or GPS would have given the same directions. Second, management was terrible. If he'd gotten away with it, they would have praised him for doing whatever it takes to get the job done. Remember, I'm just the delivery boy. My opinions and knowledge didn't matter. Lastly, my direct superior was there for the conversation. He understood the possibilities, and as my supervisor, it became his responsibility to deal with. He preferred to resolve conflict by avoiding it. Frankly, I think he was tired of the big dog attitude and happy to see this guy get what he had coming. 4. This happened in the mid-90s when I was pregnant with my youngest child. This was a difficult pregnancy, and so my strength and mobility were limited. I had just finished shopping at a very crowded Costco and pushed my cart to my car, put my toddler in her car seat, and attempted to haul a large bag of kitty litter into my trunk. Unfortunately, I could not. My tired and pregnant body would not allow me to lift that bag. Any time I got into a good position to lift, either my swollen fingers wouldn't release the bag, or my body just wouldn't go up. I spent several minutes trying and failing to do this. Suddenly, there was a honk. It turns out that there was a vehicle waiting for my parking spot, and I just wasn't moving fast enough to please that driver. Apparently, he figured that I simply needed some auditory encouragement to get my lazy butt moving. And when that didn't work, Mr. Impatient honked again with the same results. Finally, the driver from the vehicle behind Mr. Impatient got out of his vehicle, walked over to me, and lifted the bag into my car for me. In my way of saying thank you, I told Mr. Helpful, "Stick around, you can have this spot." He smiled and went back to his vehicle. I got into mine and picked up a book and quite obviously began to read. Mr. Impatient began honking long honks at me. I ignored him. The drivers from the line of cars that backed up behind him began yelling at him to move along. After honking at me a few more times, he finally left. Then I put my book down, started my car, waved to Mr. Helpful, and went on my merry way. 5. A little backstory here. I had only been working about a month, but I took to the job very quickly and, up until the end of my run there, enjoyed it. Sort of. My job was vinyl window welder, with a miners and everything else. And what I did was pull parts of plastic vinyl windows off of a cart, loaded them into a machine, and then the machine melted the edges and pressed them together, forming a bond. This would be sent down the line to get the spew from melting cleaned out, and then put together or just carted back to the back of the building to be stored till the frame was needed. The story. It was a pretty standard day on shift, except I was dealing with a new line lead, LL, who for all intents and purposes was an idiot. He and his girlfriend were both line leads on the same shift now. I'm sure you can see the problem here. And he was pretty well known for not planning ahead or doing much of anything beyond walking around to see his girlfriend and complaining. Anyways, I walked in as per usual and asked what they wanted or needed done for the day. Since we were night, we ran stock mostly, and it was a slow time of year, so we had to be careful how much extra we ran. Normally I get some small number that I can knock out by lunch, and then head down the line to help them out the rest of the day, taking it nice and easy. Today, however, LL snapped at me and told me, "Just run until you're out of material." Big mistake. I don't take kindly to his crap, and seeing a bit of opportunity here for some malicious compliance, I just replied, "Okay." I went back to my machine and ran it hard. By lunch, I knocked out about 250 to 300 windows and was running low on carts to store them on. Knowing this, on my return from lunch, I stopped the LL and asked him what he wanted me to do. "Run it, store them on the table, or just stack them on the floor if you have to. We'll run them down the line." As I said, he himself was new to the position as well, but even I knew the line could only ever run about 300 at max per shift, and my frames and the frames left behind by day shift added up to close to 500. Nevertheless, I complied, and continued to run frames until the guy running the saws behind me ran out of parts for me. My total is sitting at right around 400 frames now. I once again approached LL and informed him of this. "Just do up as much of the customer windows as you can so day shift has something to start with." He was visibly annoyed with my constant interruptions of his conversation with his girlfriend. Not arguing, I walked away with a wide grin on my face. When the guy running the machine after mine saw me, he asked what I was told, and upon hearing it, laughed along with me. He knew he wouldn't have to deal with it. His stock was enough to keep him busy the rest of the day. After a good laugh, I walked back to the machine and started cranking out the customer windows. These took a bit longer, but I still ran them as fast as I could. To my surprise, they were the easiest windows to weld, and still took no time at all. By the end of the shift, I had done right around 600 windows, and my area was filled to the brim with material. But none of the unwelded stuff left for the day shift in the morning. When I finished the last customer window, it was right around 4 AM, which was clock-out time. I cleaned up my area, headed up to the front, and clocked out. The next day I come in, and I'm told we're not running my machine tonight. Why not? I had to stifle a chuckle. I knew exactly why not. I was then told that I ran too many windows and that they didn't know why I did that many. The LL tried to pass the blame off on me, saying he told me to do this many windows or that many windows, but each time I had spoken to him I made sure someone was there with me, and they all backed me up and informed my superior that LL had told me to run them all. This LL was never fired while I worked there, although from this day on I made his working life a living hell whenever he started his little routine. Each and every time it happened, he got told that he needs to pay attention to the numbers and not run the factory out of work. Negative consequences came with this. I was then deemed one of the fastest, if not the fastest, window welder. As true as it was, it made some of my job harder, but I honestly didn't mind. The more work I had, the faster the days went by. Looking back, yeah, I'm an asshole. But none of the product was ever bad or broken. Not on purpose. It just got done too quickly. The same LL would eventually be the reason I walked off site and quit. Good riddance to the worst job I've ever had. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, number 26. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories and sent in stories for use in this video. If you have a story yourself, you can send it to kingofthecities@gmail.com. The email can be found in the description of every video. Well, almost every video. Okay, that's the recording done now, so I can put the fan back on. I got started really late recording today. It's currently 4:15 in the morning. I'll have to get these videos knocked out in the next couple of hours, as quick as I can. It was a busy day for me today. I had a lot to do, so I didn't really get started till later. Then I was hot and tired, and doesn't matter. Anyway, doing it now. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.